All right, another podcast from the Michigan Institute of Athletics in Brighton, Michigan. It's going to be a stellar podcast today. Right before I get into it, I want to shout out VetLife. VetLife is a 501c3 nonprofit company. It's a company of veterans for veterans. Every veteran faces difficulties when they transition from active duty back to civilian life, and VetLife is there to ease that transition. If you'd like to reach out to VetLife, you can do so through Instagram or Facebook, or check out their website at vetlifetoday.org. So without further ado, I want to introduce Dave Woodruff, a gentleman that has an incredible story. He's a part of an absolutely massive foundation. I don't want to steal any of his thunder. I want him to be able to talk about this open-ended. So Dave, for the listeners that don't know you, I want to take it all the way back. You know, were you born and raised here in Michigan? What were you like as a kid? What was your family like? And then we'll expedite the story to you as an adult.
Yeah, James, thank you. Yeah, our entire family's from Michigan. We grew up here. My grandfather actually was a Ford dealer in Detroit, so he worked for Henry Ford. His two brothers came up from Tennessee after his father died, so he's like part of the origin story of Detroit, where they came up because they had to find work, and his mother couldn't support him. So he came up, and he worked his way up, and Henry Ford actually gave him his first dealership, which was Russ Dawson Ford in downtown Detroit. It's actually, if you ever go to Detroit, you can see the Model T plant on Woodward Avenue. That was his dealership after they closed it.
Wow, you're dropping bombs right on the start of this podcast. I have a Henry Ford plaque sitting right outside of this door that says whether you can or whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. I mean, that's an incredibly influential person in American history.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and right off the bat, you're coming in hot with that story. That's awesome. That's really awesome.
And, it's funny, the work ethic that had to come from that. My grandfather was an incredible guy, but he was tough to work for. So, it kind of, when you're young and you start, hearing about the stories of how the influence that you have from your grandparents and et cetera, he influenced us a lot, I think, but he gave us a great life too, because there's no doubt when you're the first Ford dealer or auto dealer in Detroit coming out of the war, he did really well. So that's, so we're from here. And interestingly, I'm the only one that still lives in the Metro Detroit area. I have one brother who lives in Ann Arbor, but my brother Bob, who, so much of what we're going to talk about today is all about what happened to him. He took off and went all over the world. I've barely been anywhere, so So I'm the guy who's stuck around home. But
he was the young dreamer.
Yeah.
He said, "Man, I'm going to go and see this thing."
Exactly. Yeah, and it's cool too is that one of the things that we lost my father at 91 years old on June 1st this year. And we talked a lot about it, too, as a family, that he brought us up completely. All four of us, there are four boys in the family, all brought up in sports. So we all played everything. And athletics was, so critically important to us that, we all played, Little League, everything. Some of us played in college. I played a little bit of soccer in college. My brother, though, Bob, he played at Cranbrook. He learned lacrosse at Cranbrook, and he ended up at Colgate University. And he held the scoring lead at Colgate University up until about 7 years ago. And he's, leading into 60 right now. So, yeah, sports and all that was really important to us. So, that's kind of the memories I have of here is really, learning to play sports, everything that meant. My father had a famous quote. I love this one, and we played off of it at his funeral. His favorite thing to say to us was, "If you can touch it, you can catch it." And that kind of applies to life, doesn't it?
100%.
Always make that extra effort, right? Because, you never know. If you can touch it, you can catch it.
Do you feel like sports absolutely shaped you psychologically as a young man, like being a part of a team, having to step up, work ethic?
1,000%. I mean, that for us, because that's really all we did, So it definitely defined all of us.
Yeah, and it was a little bit simpler times back then. Like nowadays,
Totally.
You have so much entertainment. You have so much living on a virtual screen. You have kids that are enveloped in a virtual world, but they're not using their bodies or they're not interacting socially the way they should be or developing, through just hard work and grind. Like sports are tough if you want to be successful. Like it sounds like, you guys weren't just playing to be on a team. If you're breaking records, the scoring record that lasted for decades, you were highly successful athletes, which comes from learning to push yourselves, being a part of a good culture, having, role models that set a standard. Like you said it right off the start. You said my grandfather wasn't an easy person to work for, but that sets an expectation, and expectations can be good things, right? Absolutely. They hold us to a higher standard than to just be like, well, I did a C+ job. Your grandfather would have been like, "That's a terrible job."
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
unacceptable.
No, absolutely. And it definitely, I think set us up for always trying to do better, always trying to do and also too, just the idea of being on a team and pulling for each other, pulling for everybody else in the world, it's really did help, from my own mental place to be, set up to do what we're doing in the veteran space. So yeah, it's and we'll talk some about that. But sports to me was central to us growing up here in Michigan. We got to do everything from soccer, football to skiing, everything, and it was great.
So do you remember what you wanted to be when you were growing up? When you were, getting through high school or college? Like, did you know what you thought you were going to be? Because it's a question I'd love to ask people, because life tends to, open a surprise door for you, or you get knocked down, or you have this crazy thing that hits you, and then it shapes your life story.
Yeah.
But, do you remember what you thought you were going to be in the world before,
Yeah, and this is another irony. So I have a broadcast journalism degree from Miami University. So basically, my brother is living the life I thought I was going to live. I started out when I was at Miami. I had 2 internships, one at WJR and one at WXYZ Radio. So I covered sports for a while. I covered auto racing. I was actually on the production team for the Michigan Panthers, believe it or not, in the USFL. So I did a lot of on air. I was on the air doing commentary on the hydroplane races in Detroit for several years. So I thought I was going to do that, and I ended up in marketing and advertising sales because I didn't want to go to Des Moines. This is a family story, it's like, so I did that. I got into it. Then Bob, who, ended up being a lawyer, decided when he was in China during Tiananmen Square, and there's a whole story there, that
I'd love to hear that, by the way.
Yeah,
I mean, capturing these moments in time, these are amazing things. So please, any story that you want to tell, there's not a story too long. I enjoy these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. But the cool thing about that is when he came back, he had been exposed to CBS News there while he was not able to teach, and so he came to me and said, "Hey, how can I get a job in broadcasting?" So the history goes from there, and we can talk about that. Yeah, I always wanted to be on the radio or on television, and that never happened. But I did get to do that in college, and it was really, really fun. I had a great time.
I was going to say, I could kind of tell right when you sat down, you were ultra comfortable behind that microphone. You spoke clearly. The way you articulate yourself, it's obvious that you have, either you use communication, very often in your career, or this was a part of your background story. I could tell immediately, because most people, when they sit behind a microphone for the first time, especially in an unscripted dialogue where they just have to, converse about whatever topic, you can see the tension and nerves. You sat down and was like, "Oh yeah, no big deal. Let's go WJMR. Let's go. We're on the
Yeah,
you know what I mean?" It was great to see.
Yeah, it is great. I love it.
But let's go to the next stage of the story. So Bob comes to you and basically says, "Hey, I want to pursue this avenue. You're the one doing it. Can you give me some guidance?" Let's start to take it from there, because I think it starts to build a beautiful story on how we get to where we are.
You're right. And at the time, he had come back from China, and he was working for a law firm out of New York. And because he spoke Chinese, which, by the way, he learned at Michigan Law School while he was going to law school, gives you an idea of what kind of a brain he has.
Incredibly intelligent.
Very intelligent. Basically the kind of mind that can capture everything and keep it. So he came to me and said, when I was in China during Tiananmen Square, because they shut down the university he was teaching at, he had made friends with a CBS cameraman who said, "Look, CBS News and Dan Rather's group could use a translator. Would you be interested in doing that?" And he said, "Absolutely." So he got with them and started working, and then was there the night of Tiananmen Square when all hell broke loose. And he actually that night was running videotape on a bicycle to the CBS headquarters from the field camera guys, and just got completely hooked on the news business. And when he came back, which at the time I was living in New York working for Campbell-Ewald Advertising on Chevrolet, we met him. He was on one of the last planes out of China, ironically. And I remember him saying, they're moving me to San Francisco because they want me to work on the Asian Rim mergers and acquisitions team for this law firm. He says, "But my heart's not in it." I said, "Well, just keep pounding away." He says, "Yeah, I love this news business thing." I said, "Well, we can talk." So he gets to San Francisco, and this is the other thing about my brother, and again, is eventually becoming the correspondent at Saturday ABC News. He's in he's in San Francisco for maybe a month in the offices of his law firm. And what happens? The San Francisco earthquake. And so he's there for that. So he grabs his big video camera of the time and goes down to the Marina District and starts shooting video and basically doing stand-ups because I told him, I said, you're going to have to build a tape. You're going to have to do a demo tape. So he starts doing that. And, he's still like, I got to get in this business. What do I do? I said, well, get a copy of Broadcasting Magazine, because that back in the day, that was what you did, was a magazine, and look for a job opening, start sending tapes out. So he starts doing that, and nothing's happening. Of course, nobody's going to just pick up some lawyer from San Francisco. So he says, you know what, then I need education. I said, well, okay, so what does he do? He applies and gets accepted into Berkeley's School of Journalism. So it's the first day of classes. He goes to class, and he comes back. The next day he goes in, and he comes into the professor's office, and he says, hey, I got a call last night from this television station in Chico, California. They want to hire me as a one-man show. And he goes, what do you think? And the guy goes, well, the dean's going to shoot me, but I say go. He says, we could use you here, as an adult taking the journalism classes, but no, you got to go out and get the real world experience. And, very quickly he went from Chico, California to Richmond, Virginia to Phoenix, and then in a matter of 7 years, I think, and then ABC News picked him up for their affiliate news service called News One. He moved to Chicago to do that, and 2 years later, Peter Jennings had seen him and said, I want this guy working in New York. And fast forward to the 2005 when Peter was ill with lung cancer. They named Bob and then Elizabeth Vargas as co-anchors of ABC News. So in about a 10-year period, he went from, attorney in San Francisco to the co-anchor of World News Tonight in 2006.
Was your brother someone that just from a young age just had tons of confidence in himself and the ability to follow like what he believed in? Because hearing that story already, that, all right, I'm going to China, I'm going to become a lawyer. Oh, now I'm going to get into broadcasting. Now I'm going to get hired by this. It's just a man that points himself in a direction and goes that's where I'm going to go. How do I get that? It's inspiring to listen to. Was he like that from a young age?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he always had the wanderlust that none of us had. He at one point, and I forget if it was in college or it was college, he just decided one summer he wanted to go to Israel. So he took off and he, walked around Israel and stayed in some kibbutzes and stuff. He has a great story. He went on a hike in northern Israel and he kept walking, and finally it got dark and he decided to camp. And so he pitched a tent. He wakes up in the morning as the sun's coming up with two guys standing over him with guns saying, hey, what are you doing here? He was 20 feet from the Lebanese border. And they said, you can't be here. This is a minefield. So, I mean, it does go all the way back. I think, I went to Cranbrook for 3 years. He ended up going through the entire thing. And that exposed him to a lot of really great education. Obviously, it's a great advantage we were very lucky to have. And he just always had that curiosity, which he still does. He doesn't like sitting still. The pandemic has been really hard on him, and like it has on a lot of people. But he's done extremely well. But he always kind of had. He was the guy in our family that had all the self-confidence for sure.
Got it. Now, real quick, not that I want to go back too far, but would you say you grew up in an extremely strong home with a mother, father? What did your parents do? Because it sounds like they've created such a good, successful family. The kids went on to success in all of their own avenues. Usually I find that comes from a really strong family or someone that comes from an extremely difficult background that had to rebuild their life. But you had a really strong family unit from a young age. What did your parents do?
My parents were, my father at one point early on in his career, he was a veteran of Korea, and then he came out after serving for 4 years. Never served in theater, but he served for 4 years, or 2 years rather. He came out and worked as a sales guy for Reliance Electric in Dayton, but then he came here. My grandfather, his father, not the Ford dealer grandfather, owned the DAC News, the Detroit Athletic Club News, the magazine. So he came up and got into that business. That didn't last long. They had to sell it back to the club in the early 70s when the gas crisis hit and things kind of got nasty. So he went into real estate. So he and my mother were a real estate team selling real estate in Birmingham. And to your point, I mean, we were very, very lucky. We had two very strong parents who, took care of us. Like I told you a story about, my dad was around enough where he coached all our teams in addition to us playing, which was just, a blessing. And my mom was great too. She, my mom was the kind of mom who would basically like do anything for us. So, we some would say that it would hard to learn independence when you have that kind of situation, but she was great, and my dad was amazing.
Yeah, so you just had a stellar foundation for success from a young age, and you guys capitalized on that.
Yeah.
So now, and I don't know if we should fast forward this. I don't want to skip anything, but the Bob Woodruff Foundation was, well, actually, I don't want to skip one thing. What was it like first when your brother now is all of a sudden making co-anchor to your family? Because we got to talk about that. I couldn't even imagine if all of a sudden I was turning on the news and watching my little brother on. Is he older than you or younger than you?
He's younger than me. He's a year and a half younger, yeah.
I could not imagine flipping on the news and seeing my little brother up there, especially if it was something that I was in and pointed him in direction. It would just be such an incredible thing. What was that like for your family? And then getting used to that is Bob right there on ABC. And then we'll go to the incident that took place and how the foundation was created.
Great. Yeah. It's funny because when you live in a family, we are extremely close. And we also have three girl cousins who are like our sisters. So we grew up in this very tight, even nuclear family, right? And all of us, don't even pay attention to anything like celebrity. It's whatever. It's just Bob, right? So when he started his career, he was moving up pretty quickly, so we got used to it fairly fast. Honestly, I never thought of it as anything unusual, and that sounds really strange, but he's just my brother Bob, and he's just really good at it. I had already moved on from the notion of being a broadcaster, and that was fine. I was having a great career in advertising and marketing, so I was thrilled I could live vicariously through him. For me, it's oh, that's my brother, and he's doing that. Yes, when he was named, you're going to be the successor to Peter Jennings of all people. That's incredible, and so it was great. It was pride. It was a lot of pride in watching my brother up doing that every night, and it felt great. And unfortunately, the reality is he only got to do it for 27 days. And that's where the story changes and where all of our lives changed dramatically, especially his and his family.
100%. And I think that's a perfect time to lead into it, because now what the foundation is doing is absolutely incredible. I spent some time reading and researching before, and I didn't even know about the events that we spoke about before the podcast that you have coming up. I read about the things with the NFL, but I mean, it's incredible what you are organizing and putting together. But I think we should talk about the incident that took place, lead into what, probably through the pain and sadness and emotions that you went through, you created this amazing thing, which a lot of times happens. A lot of times through tragedy or heartache or heartbreak in life, there's beauty that's born in that, so it's like a phoenix from the ashes type deal. So let's talk about that, and then we'll move on, and then let's really talk about all of the, because I feel like there's a multitude of things that this foundation does. This isn't a small little avenue. You're really branching out to the extreme.
Yeah, so I mean, for those that don't know the story, and unfortunately this happened 15 years ago, so now there's a generation of people who really weren't aware at the time when it all happened, and at the time that it did, it was January 29th of 2006, and like I said, Bob had been named co-anchor starting on that, I think it was January 3rd, with Elizabeth. And the way they were going to do that was they were going to tag team, so and not just having one anchor like David Muir does now. They would have one person that would be in the field and one that would be in the studio, and they would flip back and forth. So they would play off each other and get out and be with the people, right? So at the time when Bob was going to go out first, Elizabeth was going to be in the studio, and so they're into the 26th, 5th day. And at the time in 2006, it was the Palestinian election. So Bob went to Israel to cover that, and about a week later was going to be the President's State of the Union. And so they covered the election, and I'll get it wrong, but Hamas or one of the parties won, which was big news. So they said, why don't you stay there and cover the outfall from that, and then stick around to get the reaction to the State of the Union in Israel. So he was going to do that. But in typical Bob fashion, he didn't want to just sit around. So he said, and he keeping in mind that following 9/11, and that's really where the origin story goes back to, because when Bob was working in London for ABC News, he was the foreign correspondent for ABC News in London. When 9/11 happened, he was on the last plane out of Heathrow before they shut it down. They sent him to Islamabad, Pakistan, because they knew that the news teams knew that, and the analysts knew that this was probably Al-Qaeda that was responsible. So they sent him there to be ready to cover it. So it goes back that far. So he decided to get a hold of some of his friends in the military and see if he could embed with an American force in Iraq. So we're talking 5 years later. The invasion of Iraq, was active. So he went in, and he ended up with an Army division, and was covering the division, going in to see what's going on, and they were in a convoy, and he was in an American vehicle, and he said, you know what, I'd like to be in that Iraqi vehicle at the lead if I can. And those guys said, look, this is dangerous. I mean, there's a lot that can happen here out on these roads. It was outside Taji, Iraq. And he said, you know what, I'm fine. I'll go up with those guys. I trust them. So he got in this vehicle, it's armored transport, and he was, they were going up down a road, and he and his cameraman decided to go out and do a stand-up. So he was out of a porthole or a hatch, and his cameraman, was facing him. Bob had his back to the side of the road, and there was a date palm grove, and the guys that radioed and said, hey, look, keep an eye out for that. There could be something in the date palm grove. They barely got that out, and there was an explosion. So they estimate at least 30 pounds of explosives covered by concrete, because these were concrete roads, so they'd put the IED, cover with concrete, increase the shrapnel load. So he got blown up, hit by shrapnel, knocked down into the tank. His cameraman, got less of a blow because Bob was blocking it. His producer was down in the tank, Vinny Malhotra, who has gone on to be very, very successful at CNN. Vinny sees Bob fall down into the tank. He's bleeding from the neck because he got a lot of shrapnel through the side of his neck, into his back, into his head, all that. Bob was conscious at that point, and he'll tell you that he remembers that moment, but that's the last thing he remembers. But he asked Vinny, am I alive? And Vinny said, yes, you are, while he's holding his neck, keeping him from bleeding out. So Doug, his cameraman, was injured as well, but was conscious. So, they knew that he was okay. But subsequent to that, and a lot of this we have found out, as he has, over the years, when people have come to talk to us because they couldn't talk to us before, what happened in that moment. But there was small arms fire because the Marines that were supporting this, or the Army guys who were supporting the convoy, got out and engaged these guys. And as we understand the story, they're not sure how many fighters, but they took them all out. And so, but while that firefight was going on, they called in air support to evacuate Bob and Doug and Vinny, and they came in under fire and got those guys out of there and took them to Balad Air Base, where they had emergency surgery. The cool thing about that, we didn't find out about that part of it, about the evacuation, until probably 12 years later, when Bob talked to a guy from that unit who also told him that those guys got direct orders not to land, and they ignored them to go get them. So, you hear these stories, it's humbling, it's incredible, but it's also, part of what we talk about all the time is this stuff happens for a reason. And so to kind of finish that part of the story, Bob gets taken to Balad. And at that time, the U.S. military and really the civilian medical community didn't have the nearly experience with the IED issues than they do now. They didn't have the kind of sophistication in surgery, so they have it now with all the experience. But they took off part of his skull so his brain could swell without being damaged, and they did that surgery, and I think they airlifted him to Landstuhl at Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany within 6 hours. And in that time, they had gotten a hold of us. Lee, his wife, and his kids were ironically at Disney World, and Bob worked for Disney and ABC. So they flew her back home. They flew me and my mother and father to New York. We connected there, and then Lee, myself, one of her best friends, Melanie Bloom, who was the widow of David Bloom, who was killed, or actually died of a thrombosis that he suffered during the invasion of Iraq when he was in a tank for too long. Lee's brother-in-law, and then a guy named Jim Murphy from ABC, who was our great, incredible guy. So that we all flew over there because they weren't sure if he was going to make it. In fact, we learned out later that he was toe-tagged in Balad, so they didn't think he was going to make it. So we get over there and we see him there, and then we're there overnight, and then they say we're going to transport him to Bethesda Naval Hospital, which is now Walter Reed, or part of Walter Reed, and flew him there, and we went back separately, and then that started the whole 37 days of being unconscious. He was in a coma for 37 days, but we were near the end of that period, where 37 days after multiple surgeries, we had surgeons come in under kind of dark of night from the civilian world to do some cranial-based surgery, etc. He was doing well, but he was still unconscious, and they said, we just don't know when he'll wake up. His neurosurgeon, who's now a really good friend of mine, Rocco Armanda, said, look, he said, a lot of times in these cases, what'll happen is he'll go through this, and then just one day he'll just a light will go on, and he'll wake up. It happens. And he says it especially happens in older people, because the younger guys don't have the same kind of brain elasticity that he does. And then we were like, oh, God. So the last weekend before he woke up, we were there, and we were going to visit rehab facilities and thinking that, this will be a long-term deal. I went home to Michigan, and the next day I got a phone call at 7 a.m., and it was Lee, and she goes, hey, Dave, someone wants to say hello to you. And it was my brother. I woke up just like that. They didn't even know he could talk, because he had a rock that went right through the base of his tongue. So he gets to that point 37 days later, and he wakes up, and now there can be another part of the story.
That is absolutely incredible. And the amount of things that had to happen for them to disobey that order. We're landing anyway. We're getting this gentleman, to having a toe tag on your foot, to not knowing if he would ever wake up, to not knowing what state he would be in when he woke up,
exactly.
if and when. For everything to just work out. It's almost like, how can you not believe in something bigger than yourself or ourselves after you experience something like that with your brother? And like, I don't understand in the medical world, like, how that even happens, where when you're out for 31 days, and then one day the brain just like switches back on. That is miraculous. That is unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, he'll tell this story. He's told it before. I mean, were we religious? We were brought up, to be that. He saw himself floating, or he saw his body below him when he was in the tank that minute before he went unconscious. He talks about seeing himself floating below him. And, I've said for many years when I'm asked about it, it's like, I believe Bob survived this because he had great things to do. And so that kind of drives me all the time as we do the work we do now with the foundation. And, he's very humble about that. He's like, well, but what that whole idea of like all the things that happen, it's all centered on this thing that we weren't familiar with, and that's the military kind of cultural world. These guys take care of each other. And my brother's a reporter, but he was with a unit, so he might as well have been a member of that unit. And that's how they think about Bob, and that's how Bob thinks about them. Bob is a member of the tribe. And so knowing that there's good outcomes out there kind of drives what we do, and it does for him too. It's why he stays in this and is so passionate about it.
100%. I feel like that brotherhood exists in the military, and that's one of the hardest things that people have to face when they leave that brotherhood, is because they get so attached to, like, when it's life or death, and you're looking at another human being next to you, and you know that they're doing everything they can to keep you alive, and you're going to do the same for them. How can that not create an incredible bond that will probably last your entire life? So if you came back and these people weren't around, that's probably a shot to the heart. You know what I mean? Your brother experienced it just as a reporter, being there for a super short period of time, and those people treated him like a family member, like someone that they loved and cared about. When, like you said, from an outside perspective, you're like, that's almost a stranger to you. But yet they were like, no, this man is here with us, and we will, see this out to the end. That's incredible. So how did the foundation, like, who initially came up with the idea for the foundation? How did it come together? And then let's build it into, because anything in life usually that's great starts from like a single spark, a single idea, and then all of a sudden that idea can manifest into just an incredible, end result. But how did that initially get started? Well, was it just rolling around ideas like, man, we can do something with this? Or
yeah, I think that's a great point you make, James, because it's just so cliche, but every trip of 1,000 miles starts with one step. So we even when Bob was not conscious yet, but the signs were good, I would be there with my sister-in-law Lee, my wife Leanne, ironically, my brother Mike, who's another one of the brothers, and our brother Jim. But we started out talking about like the experience we've been through, especially at Bethesda, where we started to meet all these people in the military. We also met other families and other soldiers, airmen, sailors, mostly Marines, because it was the naval hospital at the time, who just didn't have the access to the kind of care we had and didn't have the flexibility. And we were well-off family. We could travel to and be there. I was working for Hearst at the time, Hearst magazines, and they let me do what I had to do to be with my brother. So I would go there and be in D.C. for weeks on end. We saw these families that couldn't do it. Their spouses couldn't leave their jobs, or they'd lose their house, and so they couldn't do that. They didn't have they had the acute medical care that the military will provide them, but even looking and following some of them that left after recovering, they didn't have the kind of support. And at the time, the rural support structures for VA health was really, really challenged. It's gotten a lot better, but they didn't have access. And if you know anything about the volunteer military, it's highly overrepresented by people in rural areas. As we say, CD counties. And so they'd have to drive miles and miles and miles to get to their VA, right? So we saw that and said, gosh, if we ever get a great result from Bob's recovery, we should try to do something. And at a minimum, at the time, we were like, well, maybe we can raise a few dollars with our friends and give them, to these families we've met to try to help support their kids.
It makes perfect sense, because you guys got hit so hard emotionally, and you watched these people be there to save your brother's life or your family member's life, and then you saw other people in the exact same situation. And when you realize, as human beings, it's a beautiful quality when we look at each other more that we're the same than we are different. And you go, man, look at all these people that are in this same exact struggle that, like you said, don't have access to the same resources. What if we could be the people that move the needle in the right direction to save one more Bob, in another family, another Bob's life,
right?
Another brother's life, another son's life. It makes perfect sense to me. I can see how that connected, and it was like, it almost probably became a purpose or a mission. Like, that we need to be a part of this, and we can move this in the right direction as you got it going.
It did. I mean, for me, it was. I've always tried to. My wife accuses me of being the guy that never says no. If someone asks me to do something, or
I'm the same way.
Yeah,
man.
and I just, it's just who I am. But I had started an endowment with the Children's Hospital of Michigan through a sporting clays thing that I've did for years with Field and Stream and Outdoor Life when I was there, and we endowed a chair in pediatric rehab at Children's Hospital, and so I knew how to set up a 501c3. So we said, okay, well, let's do this. But at the time I'm working, so we ended up partnering with the Brain Injury Association of America, because Bob's main injury was traumatic brain injury. And at the time, that was like the wound that was coming out of of Iraq and Afghanistan, because this is the first time we had dealt with all these IEDs, and as you may or may not know, that's a big problem now with not just people who have been impacted physically by these IEDs, but even if they're close, they had a lot of issues with concussion, et cetera, and that's a big problem. So we started out working around the idea of helping with traumatic brain injury. And so we worked with the Brain Injury Association to get started, and it took off from there. I mean, we people always ask, like, so why did you do it? And I said, well, we did it because it was like, we didn't see any reason why we shouldn't. It's like, we can do this. We had the advantage of Bob was a celebrity. Let's face facts. And at the time, there's always, celebrities out there kind of doing what they want to do from a charity standpoint. We had, Michael J. Fox with Parkinson's. You had, at the time, Christopher Reeve was still alive, and, issues with spinal cord injury. But there was nobody talking about traumatic brain injury, because and the traumatic brain injury affects the civilian population at a much higher rate than it does the military population, with, head injuries from everything you can imagine. So we got involved in that, and at the time, it was the right thing for us to focus on. We could keep ourselves focused on raising money and then giving it to individuals at the beginning, and then really evolving into organizations that were doing the work on the ground in those rural areas or other areas across the country. So because of the experience that I had and because of the support of my wife and then my sister-in-law and brothers, et cetera, we said, you know what, let's do this. And I took on the role of chairman of the board, and we formed a board with some friends, and we did that. We've been doing it now. It's 15 years. This is the 15th year anniversary of the foundation, and it's evolved quite a bit. It's evolved a lot.
And I feel like even culture has evolved because we're finally talking about traumatic brain injuries across sports, across, where we're being much more careful around, exposing children to concussions over and over. When I was growing up, I mean, if we played football and we smashed helmets every single day, nobody thought about it at all. Like, you're shaking your head too. It's like, you didn't even, I played football, I played hockey, we did boxing. Nobody really thought about the damage that we could be doing to our brain.
No, I was a soccer goaltender. I was an all-American soccer goaltender here in Michigan, and I got kicked in the head one time in a game by one of my best friends from Cranbrook. Actually, I was playing for CM at the time, and it knocked me back into the goal, knocked me out. I was out for like probably 30 seconds. I came to the sidelines. This is 1977 probably, and they gave me smelling salts and looked at me and said, "Are you okay?" Getting right back in there. I mean, now with the protocols, you wouldn't play.
100%. I took a slap shot to the back of the head one time in hockey, puck right to the back of the head, and I wasn't wearing my helmet. We were just practicing. Slap shot in the back of the head, went out, hit my head again on the ground, and then had like a big swelling in the back of my head. Literally just went home, ibuprofen, ice, went and played the next day. Yeah, you just didn't think about it.
No.
It was like, hey, whatever, we're not that fragile, we're tough, rub some dirt on it. That was kind of the culture. And nowadays you have people, even the NFL has made dramatic steps to be like, hey, we want these people's quality of life after the game to be much higher. And we can do that through awareness and, bringing these things to the table that you and I, like you said, it wasn't a part of culture. No. Nobody really talked about it at all. You didn't even think about it. You banged your head hard. Okay, are you feeling all right? Well, get back out there, And so now you have culture that is starting to be more, interested in helping people live longer, healthier lives. They don't want to have people experiencing the damage. You have new science that's coming out, and you have, studies on the brain that shows, neuroplasticity slows down, and we don't want these swelling issues, which are huge. And now you're going to have driving action towards people that know how to allocate things in the right direction. Like, hey, we need people that are making steps in the right direction. So I know that the Bob Woodruff Foundation works with the NFL. You told me before the podcast about something super exciting coming up. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about some of the biggest organizations you're working with.
Yeah.
And like how your outreach has expanded.
Yeah. So in as things developed and we've had a foundation now that's raised since 2007 about $80 million given to foundation, organizations, in some cases individuals. And I think we evolved going from that whole issue with TBI to this idea that what we want to do is find the most innovative, most effective programs that are out there in the country, fund them, really invest in them, because for us, what we're trying now is create this model of force multiplier, where we want our dollars to work extra hard everywhere they can, because that way we influence more veterans' lives than if we were just doing a one-to-one, check writing thing. And believe me, there's tremendous organizations out there that do that, that pay mortgages and buy houses and build houses, and all of that's needed. It's needed.
But with the magnitude of your organization, you can be more efficient with where you
Yeah,
use
I think
funds.
so. And I think we've created this process and program where we find those programs, we fund them, and then we build on them. So we want to be multi-year investors. So because of what's happened in the veteran space over time, number one, we've worked very closely because we think there's no reason not to with the VA, with the DOD, governmental agencies that are the first line, assistance to veterans, and they have to be. We work with them to help find these organizations, find these individuals, find the issues that we should work with. And so as it's gone over time, what we've kind of evolved into is an organization that grants to organizations that are helping veterans, service members, and their families thrive. That's our mission, right? And to do it and reflect the diversity that the military community is now. We're very conscious of that. But it's interesting because we were rolling along like everybody was, and then 2020 hits, right? So we've been, like I said, the key for us too is we're not endowed. So this is not a family foundation. This is an organization we started. We're not endowed. So the dollars we raise this year, we will spend next year, and then the year after that, So we have to keep doing that. So for us, it's a constant. I say fundraising is always on, and that's my role now. We can talk about that, but last year, right at the beginning of COVID, part of what we have as a strength in the organization is we have something called the Local Partner Network, or the Got Your Six Network. We have a separate brand called Got Your Six, which in the military means I got your back, right? And that is the combination of our grantees plus our local partners. We have 5 here in Michigan actually that we work with, but mainly what that's for is for us to understand what the issues on the ground are. So we get a lot of intelligence from those groups. We have about 100 of them. Actually, just added our 100th the other day in Connecticut. They bring us information. We published a paper on COVID-19, the effects of COVID-19 on the military back in March. That paper alone had a tremendous amount of influence on what organizations across the country that are serving veterans are doing and did do during the height of the pandemic, not the least of which is Wounded Warrior Project, who we're very close with Mike Lennington, who runs that organization. They were able to use that data to go out and raise a lot more, or give a lot more money from their board. So we're proud of that, because that's that's the strength. If we can figure out where the issues are emerging as opposed to like treating them after they've emerged, then we're good. And so right now, especially important, and this isn't new, but it's become a major issue, is we just did about $6 million in expedited grants to mental health issues, organizations that are helping mental health of veterans, because you've probably heard this from other people you talk to in the space. The issues of the pandemic has, put so much more pressure on the military community from a mental health standpoint, because the things that are affecting them, food insecurity, job loss, et cetera, housing insecurity, have led to this mental health crisis, frankly, in the military community. And then you go and you add on the Afghanistan withdrawal, and these guys are like, holy cow. I mean, I can't deal with this. I did what I did, and now we're out, and it ended the way it did. So mental health is a big focus of what we do. We are also leaning into food insecurity, because it's a major problem, not only in America, but in the military community, veteran community, and the active service community. Believe it or not, it's like, you say like active service members are, they're told what to do every day, but the fact that we have people working for our military in this volunteer military who can't get the food they need every day, we need to fix that. So we're taking the funds from our partners, like you mentioned, and also healthy lifestyles is a big part of our partnership with the National Football League. So and we also so our big partners, National Football League. Craig Newmark, I don't know if you know who Craig is. Craig started Craigslist, so that's the Craig and Craigslist, right? So Craig's an incredible partner of ours. He's donated a tremendous amount of money for us, and we are working with him in 2 areas: food insecurity and cybersecurity. And then we also, with the NFL, it's Healthy Lifestyles. We're part of their Salute to Service program. We basically do the majority of their service-related grant-making work, because that's become kind of our USP. Is we're really good at grant-making. We also had a 3-year partnership, which we hope will renew very soon, with the state of Qatar. So Qatar, as you may or may not know, has the largest U.S. base in the Middle East, and of course now they are single-handedly responsible for a lot of hosting a lot of the refugees from Afghanistan. They've landed in Doha, and they've supported that. Those are our really big Uber partners. Plus, we do an event every year called Stand Up for Heroes. That's coming up on November 8th, and we have tremendous support from a lot of companies. Veterans on Wall Street, which is a group of banks and financial institutions that got together and are supporting us. And all those monies, all those dollars go to these programs that we are, focused on making sure that our grantees have an evidence-based reason for what they do, that they count their outputs. In other words, what they're doing is actually has some volume to it, and that they report on outcomes. Because at the end of the day, if you spend money on anything that has to do with veterans to solve a problem, if you're not solving the problem at the end of the day, then it's not really working. So we look at it that way, and it's we don't discount anything in terms of, what folks are doing. We are at the point now where we want to keep focused on the issues that are most important to veterans now, and also looking over the horizon to see what's coming next. And so that's the strength of the local partner network. We do have one direct service program. I want to talk about it a little bit if you don't mind. It's called VIVA, which is Veterans in Vitro Initiative. And that is the one area where we give direct grants to veterans. And it's basically because there's a lot of policy with VA about eligibility for in vitro fertilization, trying to have a family. So we stepped in partnership with them, and we fill the gaps. And we have now, in 2019, I think we gave somewhere like 14 grants. And, these are like $5,000 to fund an in vitro session. This year we gave 47. I think we just had our 20th baby born from the program. So it's, that's just the cool, part of what we do. And that's kind of the focus of the organization. And also the cool thing that for me, I was chairman up until a year ago. And my advertising marketing career was coming to an end for the most part. And I had talked to my CEO for a long time, who grew up in the organization with me, and said I'd love to do this professionally. So in July last year, I transitioned and became the chief development officer for the organization. So I'm the guy that goes out asking for money all the time, which is basically sales. So it comes full circle, right? But I have a passion for it, and this is my passion, and it's a passion because I saw what these people did for my brother, and I saw the relationships that military people have with each other, and I thought, God, it's so too bad that the entire world isn't like that. If we had that kind of relationship with everybody we were with. I mean, it's not that they don't have conflict and all that, but they have each other's backs. They've got their six, and that was something I just couldn't get past. And I said, you know what, if I could do this forever, or however you define forever, I'll do it. So that started last year, and we're doing great work, and we're in the middle of a strategic planning process for the next 3 years, and I think we'll keep on keeping on.
I mean, it sounds like you guys are spot on, because like mental health issues, like you said, have always plagued the veteran community, especially after service. It's something that the veteran suicide number is, I mean, if you're a listener at home and you haven't looked in these statistics, it's horrifying, actually. And you put them through a pandemic, and you strip, more from their lives, and you have more things that you have to juggle on your plate. It's a crazy world, and you need people that are giving tools and resources and the things to help people get through these stages, or it results in statistics that are not good, And with the size of your organization, you need to have those boots on the ground organizations, because when you were first coming in the podcast today, I was thinking to myself, like, man, how does such a mega, operation get like that personal interaction that you probably had when you started, when it was more, it's a smaller level, it's growing, but you have a perfect blueprint for that. You have your people in the communities. The way you put it was like reporting intel. Yeah. They're literally coming to you and saying, hey, these are the programs that would make a tremendous effect. This is the research we have. This is the information we're getting from the families. This is what the local branches are telling us. That's a beautiful system. So you're kind of, in a weird way, you're like chairman of a massive, nationwide organization that is just trying to better the lives of veterans.
It's really interesting. We took a look at what does that footprint look like. If we take our grantees, we take our local partners, and we put them on a map to see the coverage, we basically cover every state of the union. And ironically, and this sounds, the VA right now has about 9 million people in their system. We reach 11 million through the local partner network. So we're trying to make sure that we tell people what's available. And I know, like, VetLife, which is one of your sponsors. VetLife is a great example of like making sure that veterans know what's out there, because that's a huge problem. And we started the Got Your Six network to try to address that, and that's a long-term project. It's been going on for 6 or 7 years at least now. We called it a single front door initially, and now it's because it's grown to what it is, it's becoming effective. But it's that outbound, and then it's the inbound piece, like I mentioned earlier, where we can get information back, so we can write the papers that can have the influence. We know what's coming, and we can predict. It's incredibly rewarding work. It is. We have 23 employees at the foundation, which sounds like amazing. We're like a startup though, constantly. That's all we're just constantly starting up because we have to raise money every day, every week, every month. But most of the folks that work for us are either retired military or they have military in their families, married to military, et cetera. So I'm one of the outliers in that one. But I still feel like I'm part of the tribe.
And how cool if you could go back in time in that moment after that tragedy when you were saying, you know what, there's something here that we could do, and fast forward yourself and show that, hey, you pursue this course and you're gonna raise $80 million one year, and you're gonna be changing the lives of countless people. You're gonna be helping families have babies and helping troops connect with the things that they need. That's an incredible thing. So when you follow passion in life or when you have a vision, a lot of the times you don't need to know where it's gonna get you, as long as you have a good sense of direction in your heart. You care about what you're gonna do. You're gonna be passionate, and you have a purpose that matters. A lot of people dedicate their lives to things that they have no relationship to. So like, you may achieve a little bit of financial success, but you're not going to have the feeling that, like, I can see sitting across the table from you, the impact that you make, it matters to you. And that's important. And that's probably why you get new investors and why you get new grants and you get new funding, because people meet you and they go, wow, this guy is genuinely from his heart invested in this project.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the biggest things you have coming up, because like I said, we haven't even spoiled what you told me that I'm fired up about. Let's talk about the biggest projects that are coming up, and then just anything else that you would like to shout out about the foundation, how people can support it, how local veterans in the community could get in contact, just things like that.
Absolutely. So the great thing is we're in a new repositioning of the organization with I think I mentioned Got Your Six. So if you can, Got Your Six is really kind of like the outward facing brand. If you think about it, Bob Woodruff Foundation, people may not know who Bob Woodruff is, right? So it's easier to understand, oh, you know what, I want to have veterans back. So Got Your Six. So you can look for that brand out there. That's great. We wouldn't be where we are, though, without the support of an event that's happened ever since the beginning, and that's called Stand Up for Heroes. And I mentioned it earlier. So that's coming up on November 8th in New York City at Alice Tully Hall at Lincoln Center. We started this thing, ironically, when Bob was in his coma. We would play music for him all the time. We would also, read to him and all that kind of stuff, which is kind of standard for people when they're in comas. That's what the doctors say to do. And one of the albums we used to play to him all the time was one of Bruce Springsteen's. I think it might have been The River or something like that. So Bruce, while that was going on, Lee, Bob's wife, was reached out to by Patty Scalfa, Bruce's wife, and said, hey, we're hearing your story. I wish you the best. We hear that you've been playing Bruce's music. So they sent the entire catalog down to Bethesda. And so we played a lot of that music. And when Bob woke up, it was one of the first things he remembered. One of the only things he remembers was like that guitar. He used to call him that guitar guy. I remember that. So Bruce heard about that. And we, within the first year when we started the foundation, we were approached by Caroline Hirsch and Andrew Fox at Caroline's Comedy Club in New York. And they said, look, we do the New York Comedy Festival every year, and we're looking to do a charity event. We'd like to make you guys the beneficiary. And we're like, oh, great, that'd be cool, and we call it Stand Up, for Heroes, right? And Stand Up for Heroes is, a comedy and music thing. At least it started out as a comedy thing conceptually, and then out of nowhere, not really out of nowhere, but Bruce said, hey, look, I'll support it, I'll play. So that was in 2007. So this year's our 15th anniversary show. Bruce has done it every year except 2017 when he was doing his residency on Broadway. So he's back. The show is, we're waiting to book our third musical act. We got some great comedians. Jim Gaffigan is going to be there. We've had incredible, stars show up. I mean, Jerry Seinfeld's done it a couple times. We had Robin Williams a couple times before he passed. And it's been amazing. And that's been how we've raised the majority of our money, because that's a big night. Well, because of COVID last year, we did it virtually, but we're back live this year at Alice Tully. We've been at the Madison Square Garden Theater for the last 7 or 8 years. So that's about a 6,000 seat theater. We're down to 1,000 seats because we had to mitigate not knowing what was going to happen with COVID. So that's pretty cool. So the show's coming up on November 8th. We are, maybe by the time this gets out on the interwebs, we'll be sold out completely. But right now we've got a few tickets, and you can go to the BobWoodruffFoundation.org website to find out about that. But we also are doing some cool stuff around it. Number one, we have an Omaze bid site. I don't know if you guys know what Omaze is, but Omaze, you can go in and enter to win experiences, and we have a Bruce Springsteen experience. He's going to welcome you backstage. You come to the show, welcome you backstage. You'll win a guitar signed by him, a Telecaster Repro. In considering what's going on in the world right now, be able to meet Bruce in person is pretty cool. So we're doing that with Omaze. That's open now till the end of the end of October, I believe. And then the other thing, which I know is interesting to you, which just got approved yesterday, is that we're partnering up with the UFC. We've partnered with them before. We partnered up with them when they did UFC SEA, the Fight Island deal, when they sold T-shirts, and they gave us the benefit of the selling of those T-shirts. But we just created an experience combined with the show at Madison Square Garden, the UFC fight on November 6th. You'll win tickets, I think 4 nights in New York, and then also come to the show, the Bob Woodruff Foundation Stand Up for Heroes show. That's going to be going up on Charity Buzz. I'm not sure exactly when, but check it now and see if it's still up there. But that's just really cool. And the guys at UFC have been great. Dana's been an amazing supporter of what we do, and so I won't lie. It's great to have all these types of things supporting you. Bruce has been amazing. Bruce and Patty have become friends, and it's cool. So, but for us, we're expanding what we're doing from an event standpoint. We're going to be. I'm heading out to San Francisco next week for Fleet Week. We're going to be sponsoring the Honor Our Fallen concert there. We're looking at doing some more events potentially on the West Coast in the next year or so. So that's the fun part,
Man, and shout out to Bruce Springsteen for being that many years, besides 2017, like you said, when he was on Broadway.
14 years.
To be there, he remembered that, and it made enough of an impact on him that he said, I'm going to permanently be a part of this.
Yeah.
What a guy.
Yeah,
I got
amazing.
a cool, quick little clip for Bruce Springsteen if you ever listen to this. I fought in a world title main event in Brazil in MMA. So I fought in an 8-man world tournament. So they had one American, a guy from Argentina, a Brazilian. They had me fight the number 1 guy from Brazil my first fight. I beat him. I went on in the next round. I fought one of the top guys from Mexico, beat him. In the finals, I walked out to Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen. So I have a video of walking out, and like, man, I tell you what, like that song was a very powerful moment in my life, because I remember walking out to this world title main event. I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And I had Bruce playing, what I mean?
Yeah,
So
if anybody can explain to me why he has not had a number 1 hit, it's unbelievable to me. I know, and he's incredible. And we've had Red Hot Chili Peppers have played for us before. We've had just an incredible run with this, and we want to see it go on forever. Nothing's forever, but we are excited about this year, and we're blessed that we have the kind of support we do.
No, I mean, you are doing incredible things. And I think the more that you show who you are and the heart of your organization to people, the more that people are going to want to be a part of it. You know what I mean? Because there's a lot of organizations out there that, overpromise and underdeliver, but it comes from the source. It comes from the people at the top that really have a passion for what they're doing or not. You know what I mean? Otherwise, you just don't know what you're going to get. You know what I mean? And a lot of things in society are a little bit disappointing, but you are a man that lived through extreme adversity and extreme tragedy and have taken that and created something incredible. So it was an honor to sit with you today, honor to talk to you today, honor to get to hear your story. If there's anything else you'd like to capture on this moment in time in this podcast forever, a sound clip, anything you like, if you'd like to tell people how they can follow you, sponsor, anything in general that you'd like to capture, and then we'll wrap this podcast up.
Thanks, James. Yeah, you know what? If my message is, don't forget veterans. As we get further away from the wars, don't forget that their needs don't go away. And I know it's there's a lot of issues that the world faces right now. I mean, I'm not discounting anything. Global climate change, all the issues, DEI, civil rights, et cetera, which is all extremely important. But we have a volunteer military. If we don't live to the promise of taking care of these guys when they get out, if they get hurt, even if they don't, but they've served, we're going to be looking at another draft again. If we have another major conflict, and I don't think anybody, wants to see that happen, so we better honor their service by taking care of them. And you can do that. Support any veterans organization. We're part of a community that just cares about these guys and these girls. That's all that matters. If you want to support us, that's great. we have you can find us online, obviously, BobWoodruffFoundation.org or GotYour6.org, and then we're all over social media. So just check us out. Stand for Heroes, hashtag BWF.org, etc. So follow us, check us out,
and like you said, there's something that's super important in what you just said, that if we don't show the support for these people, I'm sure military enrollment rates and stuff are going to plummet, because they're going to see the damage that so many of these people are coming back with no systems in place to help them. Pretty much everybody knows a veteran that has struggled substantially. Yep. So we have to move the needle in the other direction. We have to show these foundations are there and these programs are there to support the people that put their life on the line for us.
That's right.
That's a huge thing.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So truly, it was an honor sitting with you today, sir, and we'll wrap this podcast up.
Thanks, James.